Now in the next two slides we shall look at some basic transition words and phrases used for comparing two things. The first example is similarly, which means in almost the same way, and it is used to say that two facts, actions, statements, etc. are like each other. Examples: students in both schools achieved similarly low scores on the test. The next example: the United States won most of the track and field events. Similarly, in swimming, the top 3 places went to Americans. And the third example: the boys must wear a pair of pants and dress shirts. Similarly, the strict dress code requires skirts and blouses for the girls. The next transition is likewise, which means in the same way or in a similar way. Examples: I prepared well for the exam and Ali did likewise. Next, the news reported that Montana would be very cold this week. I said, likewise, Rochester will be too. The next example: he voted for the change and he expected his colleagues to do likewise. And the last example: vegetables can likewise add fiber to your diet. Now in this last slide on transition words and phrases for comparing two things, we shall look at two transitions. The first one is by the same token, which means in a similar way. Examples: you have to show respect to your colleagues, and by the same token they have to show respect to you. The second example: I'd obviously like to stay here and play out my career here, but by the same token I want to be playing first grade and at the highest level. The next transition is like. The first meaning for this conjunction is in the same way. Examples: no one sings the blues like she did. The second example: it did not turn out like I intended. And the second meaning for this transition is as if. Example: she looked like she was about to cry. The next transition phrase is not only but, and we are using it here for comparing two things. Examples: our apartment is not only centrally located, but it's near a park too. The second example: there are problems not only with the students, but also with the teachers themselves. And the next or the last example: he not only read the book, but also remembered what he had read. Now in the next 3 slides we will look at transition words and phrases used for contrasting two things. The first transition is yet, or sometimes we use it as and yet. It's used to mean despite what has been said, like nevertheless. Examples: it's a small car, yet it's surprisingly spacious. The next example: he has a good job, and yet he never seems to have any money. Next example: he did not study hard, and yet passed the final exam. Next: the weather was cold, and yet it was bright and sunny. And the last example: her advice seems strange, and yet I believe she is right. Now the transition, on the other hand, is used to introduce a fact or opinion that contrasts with the fact or opinion before it. Examples: on the one hand, expansion would be good, but on the other hand, it would be sad to lose the family atmosphere. Next example: on the one hand, they would love to have kids, but on the other hand, they don't want to give up their freedom. And the last example: it's a nice place to visit. On the other hand, it's rather expensive. Now the transition instead is used for saying that one person or thing or action replaces another. Examples: he has been playing football all afternoon instead of studying. Next: can you go to the meeting instead of me? Next example: she said nothing, preferring instead to save her comments till later. In this second slide on transition words and phrases for contrasting two things, we shall look at two transition words. The first one is alternatively, which is used to introduce a suggestion that is a second choice or possibility. Example: the agency will make travel arrangements for you. Alternatively, you can organize your own transport. The next transition word is nevertheless, which is the same as even so, and it comes in a second sentence at the beginning or end with the meaning although that is true, or in spite of that. It's used for emphasizing that the first statement is true, but it doesn't prevent the second statement from also being true. Examples: it's a difficult race. Nevertheless, about 1,000 runners participate each year. The next: the old system had its flaws, but nevertheless, it was preferable to the new one. Next example: I know he has some bad habits. Nevertheless, you shouldn't be so rude to him. Next example: I know he has some bad habits. You shouldn't be so rude to him, even so. And the last example: I'm not able to go to the beach with you. Nevertheless, thanks for asking me. In this third slide on transition words and phrases for contrasting two things, we shall look at one transition phrase and three transition words. The transition phrase, on the contrary, means the opposite. We have two examples here. The first one, the risk of infection has not diminished. On the contrary, it has decreased. Next, it must have been terrible. On the contrary, I enjoyed every minute. The transition word but. Examples: she is 83, but she still goes swimming every day. We are making good progress, but we have still got a long way to go. And the third example, his mother will not be there, but his father might. Now we have the transition word however, which comes at the beginning of a second sentence. However can also be replaced by though at the end of a sentence or between two clauses of a second sentence. Examples: her job is hard, however her salary is low. Next example, or the same example but reworded differently. Her job is hard, but her salary is low though. Or her job is hard, her salary is low however. Or we can say it again differently. Her job is hard, her salary is low, though so she is leaving. Or her job is hard, her salary is low however, so she is leaving. And the last transition here is though, which means despite the fact that. Examples: though we are only a small country, we have a long and glorious history. The next example: though I eat green beans because they are healthy, I hate them.